Hello again, drowning followers. I don't have a lot of followers yet, but I have the confidence to know that I someday will. I just completed a 1 minute narrative for my TEDx application. I did a couple of tries and tried to fine tune my message in under 60 seconds, which is actually pretty difficult to do. I have the freedom now and the time to tell you a little bit more without the time constraints. I have emphasized a lot about suicidal ideation in the last few posts. It is a rather morbid subject and a real morbid category to talk about. I have so much to say. I find it very frustrating because the theme of my talk and my message is personal accountability. There's always been a lot of irony in my story from the very beginning, and I don't reflect on the ironies now with bitterness. And while healing is not a linear process, I do suffer from bouts of ideation. Not suicidal, I promise, but bitterness and resentment and hurt. And I'll tell you why I still feel that way. A great deal of the time, people who suffer from addiction deal with so many conflicting emotions. The guilt is pervasive, the shame is pervasive. The grand ideology that society accepts is that we are ignorant and selfish, and we are motivated by self-interest, not because we are wicked or manipulative, but because we are desperate and ill. And it is a very difficult concept for those who don't suffer in the capacity that we do to grasp. I have yet to make a post with the title that I've had for several weeks now, as I run into the arms of regret. We know the derivative of our shame is that we have a profound understanding of our wrongs, and that is why we have the inner conflict and the turmoil that we do. It's not because we're selfish and ignorant. It's because we are all too aware. I find it ironic that as a self-proclaimed addict who has no fear, well, mostly no fear, no one can rid fear entirely, and has largely abandoned my shame, I have made impassioned pleas on Facebook and throughout various social media posts. I'm teaching myself how to be more media savvy and trying to spread my message. And I have to admit, it hasn't been well received. And I know why. In turn, I feel intrinsically that accountability, that addiction, and substance abuse disorder is still very much a taboo topic. And people don't want to talk about it. And I understand that people are maybe not used to having an addict, such as myself, being so free and being so shameless and talking incessantly about my message and about what needs to change. And I feel deep down that is because of personal accountability in turn. Not mine, because I am free, but yours. The loved ones of addicts who suffer. When you think in turn about all the what-if questions that continue to plague society to this day. If I had known what I could have done differently. I find it ironic that in training, in recovery, we are admonished to gain self-reflection and meditation and insight to the roots of our addictions, self-awareness, and that is something that society has yet to do. If you truly love your loved ones, you have to do the work. I have someone very, very close to me, and this is very difficult. Life is not easy. The reality is my family did do many, many kind and wonderful and gracious things for me. And as an addict with physiological deficits in memory, in recall and cognition, similar to thousands who suffer like me, we forget. We forget the goodness shown, the kindness given, and just how dire our situations were. And the reality is I did cause my family a lot of pain. I did. And I made my amends to the best of my ability. But where I'm from and where I live, it does not change the fact that I still feel deep down inside, on my chest, that I wear my letter of scarlet. A is not for adultery anymore, as Hester Prynne once bore her mark. A is for addict. And I'm going to get personal here for a minute. I said things to my family that hurt them. And this is what I said. At one point, in a bout of bitterness, I had wanted to blame my family for the dissolution of my nearly 17-year marriage. I was bitter. I was hurting. I didn't want to be divorced. I didn't want to become a statistic. I didn't want a broken family. The reality is, I did cause my family a lot of pain with my addictions. My former sweetheart, and there's a reason I call him that, and you will find that out in book 4, entitled Former Sweetheart, in my series. There is always respect and mutual honor, even throughout the bouts of bitterness. I will let him tell his story in turn if he wants to, but he does suffer from bipolar disorder. It is a devastating illness. And mental illness is pervasive in our society. And while I have a direct emphasis on my addictions, the reality is it's mental illness in turn. He has bipolar disorder. There are several members of his family that have mental health issues, and it was the complexity of that societal and family unit that broke us apart. When I refer to my letter of scarlet, when I say that I still carry that, it's true, and I'll tell you why. I'm on vacation here, and I'm with my baby sister, and I find freedom in distance. And even though I've been sober for 4 years and I've accomplished so much, the reality is just weeks ago, a family member had insinuated to me that I was still hurting the people in my life that I love the most. That I was still hurting my former sweetheart, that I was still hurting my children that I fought valiantly for. Despite my deficiencies that I carry to this day. Physiological deficiencies, impulsivity, irrationality, memory, judgment, recall. And I did it because I love my family and I love my children. Anyone who has read the Scarlet Letter knows of the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. His social standing was high and he was admired in the community. And where I'm from, our last name, is prevalent in our community. I was told by a family member that I had stained our name, and that I had dragged it over and over again through the proverbial muck, and that my father-in-law, who I love dearly and I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for, even though he did things that hurt me in turn. And that's the complexity of the dynamic of the family when I speak of accountability openly, because it is so subtle, and good people, good and honest and religious and people who are intrinsically good at their core still make mistakes and they still hurt people. And I love my father-in-law. I'm sad that I won't be bound to him as tightly as I have in times past, and that is a grievous loss. And when I was isolated and ashamed, and I missed his companionship. I did. I missed his ability to put things in perspective for me and to help make sense of my suffering. And it was a grievous loss to bear. People who suffer in the capacity that we do as addicts don't have the tools to deal with grief and loss. That's why we are victims to our addictions. to our vices that harm us because we don't have the coping skills and the coping tools to deal with our conflicting emotions. It's a coping mechanism. And the reality is, loved ones and family members get so fixated on the repulsiveness of our actions, be it eating disorder, substance abuse disorder. My former sweetheart, when I was bulimic, he said something profound to me that I will mention in my narratives. He said, every time you stick your finger down your throat, it feels like you're pushing me further and further away. In a moment of frustration, when I ran off to the bathroom to purge a dessert that I knew I couldn't digest, in a moment of frustration, he said, do I need to take down every door in the house? And bless his heart, he was so frustrated, and he didn't know how severely that comment hurt me. So fixated on the repulsivity of the action, he admonished me to go do it outside. And I felt like a bitch. Go do it outside where we can't see you. And I know that he didn't mean it. He's a good man. He'll always be a good man. I caused him a lot of pain. The Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. And without the 60-second time constraint, I find when I talk about my subject matter, I get impassioned. That is how you know that I am sincere in my resolve. This is so much bigger than me. It's become so much bigger than me. And because of my love of symbolism, because I refer to the Scarlet Letter, the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, respected in his community, a reverend of high standing, made love to this Hester Prynne, and they had a child. She would not admit who the father was, and she was a single woman. And she had a letter of A sewn to her chest as a method of public scorn and shame. And she bore it with dignity and honor. And the Reverend Dimmesdale was not so lucky. He carried his pain on the inside, the turmoil. And it's been many years since I've read the Scarlet Letter in high school as an English required assignment. But I remember how he physically abused himself, and he wrote the letter A on his chest. And he wanted to shout out to the world to relieve himself of his guilt, but Hester Prynne, in her passion, said, no, I'll take it. I'll take it. And when the town square was emptied, and when the night was still, they stood together on the scaffold, side by side with their daughter Pearl. And he wanted to admit, and I compare my former sweetheart to the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. The reason I say that we were broken was because he saw neglect and he saw abuse. He saw what I had suffered and he knew that it was wrong. But he felt so helpless, he didn't know what to do. My voice had been made to be silenced, and his had too in turn. He had split loyalties. We were in a rock and a hard place. Loyalties were questioned. He wanted to protect me. And I never respected or had profound insight into the torment of his internal narrative in turn. He could not advocate for me effectively, even though he wanted to. And it broke us. Not just because I'm an addict, not just because I caused the family pain, but because the actions of so many other people in turn. And just like that, my fluency is gone. I offered up a silent prayer in the backyard a couple days ago and recorded it, actually. That's what I've taken to doing. I don't want to go back to the community that bears my name. Because the reality is people still don't talk to me. Even though I made the most heartfelt of amends. I tried to hold loved ones accountable for the pain that they caused me in turn because I was confused. And people who suffer the way we do can't move on when we're confused. Like I said, we carry those conflicting emotions, shame and fear and isolation. We can't take on any more confusion. It's a roadblock. It holds us back from healing. And that's what my TEDx talk is going to be about, because if the loved ones who cause us pain have the strength to hold themselves accountable in turn, we would have the ability to move on from our pain. It's closure. I sought that closure to the best of my ability. And I did make my mistakes in bouts of bitterness that I tried to repair. But I still feel this deep intrinsic sense of isolation. It's unspoken, but I feel it. And I want to go home. They provided for me financially, spiritually through prayer, and they did help me in many capacities, but I still feel that exclusion because of the inability to hold themselves accountable for the pain that was caused, howbeit inadvertently. And most of the pain that loved ones cause, I feel, is inadvertent, and it is out of ignorance. And that's why I continually say that we are in an epidemic of ignorance. And when I talk about my message on social media and platforms, the response is very, very slim, because I feel people are still afraid to talk about it. I just find it ironic that I'm not, because I feel so free and I feel so confident in my message, and I want that to come across. But it's frustrating and it's hard when my family and my loved ones won't hold themselves accountable in turn and be receptive to my message. It is a work in progress, and I hope that when I land on that big red dot, that my message can spread in a higher capacity that I have been able to thus far. And I'm happy. I was at the beach the other day, and the ocean swallowed me up because I don't know how to boogie board. It was awful. And emotionally, just a little while later, I had a wave sweep over me that I'm really sad that I don't get to wear my wedding ring anymore. I liked it. I liked my wedding ring. I thought it was beautiful. And I didn't want to take it off for so long. In my 6th book, Dear Future You, I wonder if I will wear one again someday. I hope I can get more drowning followers, because I don't want them to drown in their shame, to drown in their isolation, to drown in their hopelessness and despair. People who suffer from addiction are strong. You are strong. Don't hide behind the closet. Make your voice heard. I'm here for you. And I know you're worth it. I require no further knowledge than to know that everyone who feels as I do, who thinks as I do, and who has suffered in the capacities that I have is, in fact, worth it. It's a sound knowledge that I have. And if you don't believe it, rely on my convictions and rely on my voice. I'm here for you.